My daughter betrayed me for a crown. I made sure it was only made of paper. You know, there's a certain kind of man who builds himself from nothing. Richard Villanueva was one of those men. He wasn't born into power. No, Richard carved his way into it, hands blistered from work, nights spent staring at numbers that didn't add up, yet somehow making them work, brick by brick, contract by contract, and eventually, empire by empire. By the time he was done, the name Villanueva wasn't just a name. It was a brand. It carried weight. It opened doors that stayed locked for most. But here's the thing. When you climb from the dirt to the top, every stone you step on, every cut, every scar, it means something. And Richard? He remembered them all. And through it all, through every late night and every battle fought in boardrooms and back alleys, Richard held on to one thing. The dream that all of it, everything he built, would outlast him. Now, his daughter Bianca. Bianca was different. She was born at the top of the mountain her father had climbed. She didn't know what the rocks felt like cutting into your hands. She didn't know the exhaustion of dragging yourself upward when the world seemed determined to keep you down. No, Bianca only knew the view, the penthouses, the luxury cars, the champagne nights and sunlit vacations. She lived inside the fruits of her father's labor, without ever tasting the bitterness that made them grow. And Richard, well, Richard loved her. Of course he did. She was his daughter. But deep down, he feared something. He feared that Bianca didn't just want to inherit what he built. She wanted to wear the crown without earning it. And that's dangerous, because a crown on the wrong head is just decoration. Every empire has its breaking point, and for Richard, that breaking point came in the shape of a small, unassuming piece of land. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even valuable compared to the rest of his holdings, but it meant something to him. You see that land? That was his first property. The very first brick he laid when this empire was nothing but a dream, and Bianca wanted to sell it. "Dad," she said one afternoon, standing in his office with arms crossed, "it's just dirt. We could trade it for something better, something that makes sense in the portfolio." Richard looked at her for a long moment. "That dirt," he said quietly, "was the beginning." "You don't throw away beginnings." Bianca rolled her eyes. "It's sentimental. That's not how business works." Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "It's exactly how business works. Some things aren't for sale." And that was that. Or so he thought. But Bianca wasn't done. In her mind, her father was being stubborn, old-fashioned. And if he wouldn't sell the land, well, she would. So she did something she thought was clever, something she thought would prove that she, not her father, was the one in control now. She forged his signature. The sale went through fast, too fast, and when she walked into his office, papers in hand, expecting him to explode, Richard simply nodded. No shouting, no confrontation, no lectures, just a quiet nod. And oh, that silence. That was worse than any screaming. But Bianca, she mistook that silence for surrender. She thought she'd won. But tell me, what happens when you think you've outsmarted the king, only to realize you've been playing his game all along? Weeks later, Bianca strutted into the lawyer's office like a queen, designer heels clicking against the floor, chin held high, smugness painted across her face. She had done it. She had taken what she wanted. And her father? He had done nothing. Richard was already there. Not at the head of the table. No. He sat off to the side, calm, hands folded, like a man watching a play he'd already seen performed 100 times. The attorney adjusted his glasses, sliding a folder across the table. "Ms. Villanueva," he said carefully, "I've reviewed the transaction, and I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding." Bianca frowned. "Misunderstanding?" "Yes." The lawyer cleared his throat. "The property you sold wasn't actually the asset you believed it to be. It was owned by a shell company. On paper, it held no value. In simpler terms," he hesitated, "what you sold was worthless." Silence. Bianca blinked. "What are you talking about? That property was—" Richard's voice cut through the room like a quiet blade. "You wanted the crown so badly," he said, his tone calm, almost gentle. She turned to him, confused. "What? What does that mean?" Richard stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. "It means," he said, "I gave you one, but it wasn't gold, Bianca." He leaned in slightly, voice low. "It was paper." Her stomach dropped. He straightened, looking down at her. Not with anger, but with something far worse. Disappointment. "The difference between you and me," he continued, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut, "is that I know the difference between a throne and a chair with pretty decorations." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Richard stepped toward the door, adjusting his cufflinks. "Learn that difference," he said, not looking back, "and maybe one day you'll wear something real." And with that, he left. The room was silent. Bianca sat there staring at the papers in front of her. The papers she had thought would prove her power. The crown she thought she'd stolen, only to realize it was made of nothing. And for the first time in her life, she understood something her father had been trying to teach her all along. You don't inherit an empire. You earn it, because some crowns are gold, and some are just paper. Now let me ask you this. Which one are you wearing? Subscribe if you enjoyed this story, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.